If there's one thing I notice over my years, it's how egotistical we kindred can be. Not that it's undeserved, of course. We are superior beings to the point of being almost gods to the kind, but what surprises me is how many of us flaunt it so openly, to the point where it's a detriment to us all. Us laying low is our best chance for survival, and yet some of us just can't help it. They have to stand above and lord over you, to show the world how much they possess. Many of us take this to ridiculous extremes, to the point where I view them as a threat. And keep in mind, this is coming from a Ventru, so you know I have some leeway in this. While many of us have these egos, there's one group in particular that view themselves as higher than any other I can think of. They are a group of Tzimisce who view themselves as too good to join any faction. In fact, they would never lower themselves to consider joining a sect, the old clan as many know them, but they call themselves the Dracul. I will also be discussing another bloodline of Tzimisce, known as the Koldun, as they also sprang out from the Dracul originally, but more on them later. See, today I wish to speak of the most proud and vain of our kind, as in many ways they are out of time with the rest of us. They are probably the only group that is still made up primarily of older kindred, as most of the Dracul are at least 500 years old. That is, of course, if you don't include their court, who are blood-bonded slaves to them. See, most Draculs still view themselves as ancient landed nobility, dukes, counts, petty kings, and the like, as almost all of them were not too long ago. They still hold these lands' titles and powers, and all of them still live within Eastern Europe. If they leave, it is only briefly, to visit some place or take care of a pressing matter. But a ruler cannot rule alone, and so many of them keep servants, workers, and advisors and the like. But if a Dracul takes a particular liking to, say, a bodyguard or an artisan, or maybe even a lover of theirs, they will embrace them, and forcibly blood bond them. There is not a single one of them that does not bond their newly embraced. After all, a king does get what he wants. But they will start to treat them now as part of their dynasty. They will even rename their newly embraced as if they were a new child or spouse, as that is often how they see each other. But they are incredibly tyrannical and forceful, like an aggressive father who wants the best for his child. They will treat them harshly. The Draculs delight in the power imbalance between them, often lording over their childer, who in turn will lord over the ghouls, who in turn lords over anyone who's actually working underneath them. To them, tyrant is not a dirty word, but in fact, if you were to give them such a title, they would thank you, taking it as a compliment. Quite a few of them still actually live in castles, by the way. Although due to how out of style this has fallen, many of them have actually moved them underground. This way they can keep the styles and motifs without being visible. To put this group as simply as possible with as few words as possible, they are a group of Tzimisce that still live as if the Convention of Thorns never happened. And that's because they never attended it. See, most of the rebellions of the First Anarch Revolt started in these Tzimisce Tyrant Lord lands. And so, when many of the young upstarts, as they saw them, attended the Convention of Thorns, they refused to do so, viewing the Tzimisce there as scum and anyone working with them as pathetic. This mindset of theirs still holds up to this day, viewing not only all who joined the Sabbat as filth, but all Tzimisce who spawned off from them as well. To them, they are the only real Tzimisce, and anyone else who claims otherwise is a foolish peasant with illusions of grandeur, who is probably corrupted by their use in the vicissitude. Oh, that's right, I've actually forgotten to mention that thus far. The Dracul do not use the vicissitude. They do not craft the flesh of others, perhaps not even themselves. In fact, they despise the very practice, viewing it as perverted and lesser than anything they would do. This is despite the fact their clan has always had such an ability, and it did indeed come from their antediluvian. But there is a little truth in their suspicion, for many have been magically corrupted by the use of its powers. Surprisingly, this abstaining of vicissitude actually makes them a lot less cruel. Well, compared to normal Tzimisce standards, most Dracul are as bloodthirsty as an ancient medieval king, and that's because they kind of are. But a group like this probably would not have survived long were they not tied together, and so they formed a defensive alliance, known as the Oradia League. This is not really comparable to the other sects of existence, though. It's more like a coalition, where they would drop all current slights and internal conflicts to kick out invaders before getting right back into fighting each other. The League will also check in on each other, making sure they are not using the vicissitude. But despite their hatred of flesh crafting, they actually do not have a problem with blood magic, and indeed they spawned the second group I wish to speak of today, the Koldun, sometimes referred to as Koldunic sorcerers. They're not actually a bloodline in truth, at least I don't think they are. They're more of an order, or secret society of sorts, that recruits only Tzimisce, that study a special form of blood magic. Originally they only recruited from the Dracul, as they did spawn off from them, but now any Tzimisce can be found amongst their number, and indeed the Koldun, unlike the Dracul, are global, although it is said it is much harder for those not of the old clan to learn it, many stating it's because they are weaker spiritually, whatever that means. But what Koldunic sorcery is actually quite interesting. At the end of the day, it is just a branch of thaumaturgy, and they can indeed do anything else a blood mage can, but stating it like that is not only underselling it, but removing it from its spiritual and cultural significance. Going back to the theme of ego and pride for a moment, many Dracul view themselves as masters of the land, and indeed all people and creatures that live within it know that. But that wasn't enough for them. No, they needed the land itself to know who ruled it. The rocks, the rivers, the trees, even the moss must know who its master is. And so, they went about finding a way to inform them. They ended up experimenting with blood magic, and found a way to indeed control the land through their magic. This is how the first Dracul became a Koldun. And how this actually works is, well, it's crazy to put it bluntly. See, everything in this world has a spirit. Yes, even the rocks, trees, and every grain of sand and blade of grass. But when a living being has a spirit, it is known as a soul. And we know that souls can be affected by using blood magic. So why not spirit? See, this is why they say you need to be spiritually strong in order to learn Koldunic sorcery. For you need to convey your power and authority to a rock. You need to be completely absolute and resolute in your conviction. It is not enough to believe you can control the world. You need to know you can do so, and it needs to believe you. What this all results in is blood magic being suspiciously like elemental magic, allowing a kindred to control earth, wind, water, and even fire. But this also gives them a few other abilities, as in the ability to control one's soul and how they feel towards things. They can even sap into your own willpower and cause some to enter a frenzy. In reality, Koldunic sorcery just gives you control over things. I would list all the things this allows them to do, but we do not have 9 weeks for me to do that alone. If it sounds near limitless, that's because it almost is. But there is a slight caveat to this, for it is near impossible to learn, and takes twice as long, perhaps even much longer, to learn compared to regular blood magic. See, as I said before, Koldunic sorcerers are not actually a bloodline, but more like a creed. There is no group, alive or dead, that have innate leanings toward these magics, meaning that this is an unnatural, out-of-clan power for them as well. This does mean that anyone can learn these powers, not just the Tzimisce, just they're not going to let in anyone outside of the clan into the order, and you are going to struggle to find any as strong-willed as the Tzimisce. And because of this, any who seek to master Koldunic sorcery tend to only focus on the art, as you really won't have time to do or learn anything else, and so they tend to completely lack other disciplines and powers, making them very much specialists. Even the Tremere would find their lack of other powers quite sad. It makes the sorcerers stand out, as their differences are not ones of blood, but self-inflicted ones. That's actually the major thing about these two. The Dracul and the Koldun are technically not really bloodlines. They have the same powers and abilities of the clan as a whole. They are not an offshoot, and their blood appears to have the same effects and properties. It's just culturally, they have separated. They specialized or refused to use certain things that resulted in them having their own skill set and unique properties. They have become a culture onto their own that makes their distinction akin to what a bloodline is, but they aren't really. Because of this, I'm not going to go over all of their disciplines and powers again, as everything I said in our discussion of the main bloodline of Tzimisce still stands. But instead, I will be talking about two kindred individuals, a Dracul and a Koldun, obviously, as I think they are two good examples of their groups. My first tale is of a Dracul, a war, and a duel. See, I've been around for a while now, and I myself was a conquering landed lord at one point, when we ruled openly, that was. And like with kings and lords of old, I was brought into a war in a far-flung foreign land due to a string of allegiances being pulled. We were at war with one Vastis and Dagar. Now, this was before the Convention of Thorns and the split in their culture, but he was certainly the type who would have became a Dracul, if they were still alive, that is. They met their final death due to my hand and my blade. It was quite the difficult war, though, considering Vastis was one of the few kindred who mass embraced in order to create a retinue of kindred knights, all of which I had to deal with alone. A task that sounds mightily impressive until you learned they were only recently embraced and couldn't even point to the sky. They were borderline medieval equivalent of shovelheads. Vastis himself, however, was quite tough. In the end, we stormed into his castle hold, and I met him at the top of a tower pinnacle. He was smiling and chuckling as he watched the forces cut each other down. I offered him a chance to surrender, and that was the thing that offended him. Not the war he was losing, but the fact I gave him an order.
How dare you insult me? I would never degrade myself to lower myself to your station.
And that actually annoyed me. I would have attacked him then, but he swung first, and so our duel was on. In the end, I sliced off one of his arms, ripped off the other, punched a hole into his chest, and stuck what was left of him onto a pike, where I left him atop that tower for the sun. I don't know why I was so generous to him. I gave him a light final death for those times. Of course, now that's considered barbaric. And we wonder why we are consistently getting weaker. Anyway, my second story is that of a Koldun. It is a much more recent story, only a few hundred years ago. I was in Central Africa, making a deal with a local Libon. The Libon, by the way, are a sect of African kindred. I'll talk about them probably another day, but travelling with me was a Koldunic sorcerer, a rather uncharacteristic one by Tzimisce standards. He too was an African, but not a Libon, he was Camarilla. He had the cruelty, controlling nature, and the ties to his homeland like other Tzimisce, but little else in common with them. He just went by the name Wa, and I'm still not sure if that was his real one. But at one point, we were ambushed by a mage. Now, magi are a gamble when it comes to their power. Unlike us, who have our power based on age, or the lupines who are really good at combat and little else, the magi could be anywhere when it comes to their power, really. While they do get a lot better with experience, they could start out with godlike power, they could begin at their peak, or they could train for years and years and still be worthless. Regardless, I was cautious, you have to be to live as long as I, and I saw a ridiculous amount of fire spring up from the ground, and feared for a moment that this would be my end. But then I realized that the Magi was just as worried as I. I turned to see the face of Wa, who was chanting while slamming his fist into the ground over and over again. As I felt the heat upon my dead skin, I considered fleeing. But then I saw the ground rupture again as a burst of magma sprung forth and landed directly onto the mage. I didn't even hear a noise. He was just gone. And Wa checked if I was okay seconds after, seemingly unaffected by the fire. It takes a lot to scare me, but that chaotic moment did make me shudder. Although I hid it well. I hope. Tzimisce don't tend to blend in well, and this is most often because they have crafted themselves to be a monster. This is still true for the two bloodlines I have discussed. They are monsters. The difference is that they are not monsters in flesh, but monsters in soul. The darkness of their actions is the control they have over others. Their totalitarian attempt to enslave all they desire while despising the world they seek to command, viewing themselves as greater than all. Elitist vampire monsters. But then again, what do you expect from a group that named themselves after Count Dracula? Thank you for listening to my tales. I'm the Ashspawn. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. But, till next time, fellow traveller, have a good day.